Hello, Lake Washington High School, and welcome to Diversifying Science at Lake Washington High School. We are joined again by my co-host, Mr. Miller Adams, and we are also joined by a PhD candidate at the University of Washington, Jordan Drew. So Miller, go ahead and start off with talking to Jordan about what he's doing now and where he got to where he is today.
Okay, thank you very much. And good to see all of you again at Lake Washington High School. Really enjoying the time we're spending together for these interviews. And today we have a really tremendous guest, very exciting. And I understand you've already been doing a little bit of research, so you know what he's all about. But I'm going to start kind of back in the beginning. So Jordan, I got the impression looking at your materials that you're from the East Coast. Where did you grow up, Jordan?
I grew up in multiple cities around Maryland. I moved around a lot as a kid. I went to high school in Columbia, Maryland, which is just south of Baltimore.
So you go to high school there in the Columbia area. And when did you start to have some interest in electronics or science or math? I noticed that you have interest in all of those. When did that start to surface for you, Jordan?
Yeah, my interest in math and science started really young. I've always found a natural ability for mathematics. Something about the logic is always felt like putting together a big puzzle, and everything just magic. Math sometimes feels like magic because it's just you put one thing into another and you create something else out of it. And it's very logical in that it's, 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. Where things like social studies and English sometimes required a little more interpretation. Where math, I felt like I could always use what was given and get the right answer.
I got it. And how are your parents reacting when you started to show this interest in math and science?
So my mom, I think, kind of expected it. She was kind of a math whiz herself at a young age. My dad was completely opposite, very much a social science kind of person. So growing up, I definitely have to lean on my mom and my teachers more to get the assistance. And then as I was struggling in history and things, my dad was able to come up in those places. But when it came to math, he was like, that's not my space.
I got it. So you jump into the curriculum there at West Virginia University. What started to happen for you in terms of your honing in on what was really important to you in your undergraduate years?
Yeah, great question. So I hopped into research after my sophomore year, and it was almost by accident. It was a fraternity brother of mine introduced me to his boss, who was running a lab in biometric systems. And biometrics, for those who don't know, is pretty much anything to use your body as a password. So say you use your thumb to unlock your iPhone or your face to unlock your computer. Those are all the application of biometric systems. So it's a really new area. So he introduced me to his boss to get a job. And I had coincidentally applied for a research position just on campus that would allow me to go to any lab that was interested in me. And just the timing really lined up. He said he had some open projects for some undergrads. And I got in there not knowing much about research at all or having that much interest in biometric systems. But it was the first time I got to see the things that I was doing in class be able to apply to real life. So it started to spark this interest that I could ask questions on my own and apply this knowledge to things that I was personally interested in. And over the years, as I continued in these engineering programs, learning about how computers work, somewhere along the way, I looked at the brain and went, wow, that's a really beautiful and complex computer, and decided to kind of shift a little bit and focus more on the brain.
Interesting. Last question before we turn it over to Andrea for the students' questions. You're pursuing your PhD in electrical engineering. Will you need to write a dissertation in your PhD program and defend that dissertation?
I will. So my last year or so will be really focused on writing a dissertation. The idea, how I envision it right now, consists of about 3 research papers that I will publish ahead of time, and then I will kind of put those together as chapters in this story of what I've been doing over the past few years. And the point of the dissertation is to add something to the research literature that already exists out there. So mine being auditory attention, how people can say we were all together right now, and I was listening to you and then listening to Andrea and going back and forth between you, understanding what in the brain helps me be able to switch back and forth between you. So adding that space to the literature is what the dissertation itself will be.
Oh, that's exciting. Really exciting. Well, I'm going to stop now and turn this over to Andrea Thody. Let her pick up the questions from the students. Really nice meeting with you today, Jordan. Look forward to chatting with you. Perhaps when we can actually meet again after the pandemic, I can tell you about my time in Columbia, Maryland. Andrea?
That'd be great.
So Jordan, you were just mentioning a little bit real quick about some of the research that you're kind of hoping to start towards the end of your PhD. And I was wondering if you could talk quickly about some of the research that you're actively doing right now.
Yeah, so what I just mentioned, it is where I'm at right now. So I have all this data that's coming from brain signals, and it was recorded while people were doing this task, listening to two people talk. And within that task, they are told which person to pay attention to and whether to switch attention midstream or to maintain attention on who they're listening to.
Oh my gosh, so cool. That's fascinating to me to think about because it's like in this concept of like multitasking and like how do you multitask with your brain and your ears and that listening component. Very cool. So Jordan, real quick, I want to also ask you kind of a little bit about when you kind of started to think about when you were going to become like a scientist and an engineer. If you weren't a scientist and engineer, what would you be today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually coming out of high school, I wanted to go into the FBI. So I was talking about my love for math as like solving these large puzzle problems. And I saw the FBI as doing that kind of thing, so solving crimes as a big puzzle, understanding motives and a timeline is a big math problem. And I was doing college visits and I stopped at the FBI headquarters in Baltimore. And someone who was really kind, a recruiter came out and talked to me and said, if you want to be a field agent, go learn as much as you can about computers and engineering.
That's so cool. And so Jordan, when you were kind of talking about when you decided to like really focus on this like brain science and like matching with like your love of like computer science as well, you mentioned how the brain was actually kind of just a really big computer. And I was wondering if you could explain to my students a little bit about how the brain is a computer when it comes to hearing. So really, how does hearing work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you think about sound, it's actually a physical wave that moves through the air. So imagine dropping a pebble in a pond and you can see the ripples of the waves moving. That's the same way that it happens in the air. If I snap my fingers, it's actually pulsating the air, compressing and expanding closer and closer. That sound wave then enters my ear, vibrates my eardrum, and there's this long chain of reactions that transforms that physical sound into an electrical signal that your brain can interpret as sound.
It's so cool to think about. I want my students to draw these particle diagrams of like these compression waves that is actually traveling. About how we can't actually see this, and then you're getting to see this actual electrical signaling, like measuring it on your computer for what is actually happening when they're listening to sound. I think that's so cool. So Jordan, I know that you've done a little bit of research with like hearing and hearing aids and cochlear implants, and not only do my students want to know, but also me, I really want to know, how do these work? How do these electronics really work to amplify hearing and get you to hear?
Another great question. So they kind of mimic the natural ear. So imagine several filters laid next to each other that each process different frequencies of sound. So there will be one filter that would process my voice being a pretty low frequency sound. And then there would be another filter that would process high frequency sound, say like a bird chirping. So when those filters are activated, it then sends an electrical signal through the hearing aid or the cochlear implant to send it to your brain. So the big difference between hearing aids and cochlear implants, hearing aids are actually just a microphone, these filters I'm talking about, and then a speaker, so that it can turn up whatever frequency you need. So every person will have a different prescription in their hearing aid to turn up this frequency that they need. A cochlear implant is for someone who is severely deaf and their inner ear pretty much doesn't work. So there's an electrode that goes into your ear and pretty much replaces the function of your ear and directly stimulates your auditory nerve, or as close as we can get to the brain, sending these electric signals directly. That's the big difference between those two technologies.
It's crazy to think about how far technology has come with these cochlear implants, where they're directly stimulating a nerve, and thinking about how that technology development has happened. So as an engineer, I know that you're constantly thinking about how is technology going to evolve, what is going to happen in 5, 10, 20 years. So Jordan, my question is, where do you think hearing technology is going to go from here?
Yeah, that's of my favorite questions. So in terms of working with the hearing impaired community, I imagine as we get to know the brain better and how it processes sound on a higher cognitive level, that we could stimulate higher parts of the brain. So it's not so much a low level trying to replace the ear, actually stimulate the parts of the brain that make you feel and make you understand language. So if we can stimulate those directly, then we can have this deeper, higher fidelity perception of sound. And in terms of, say, like the headphones I'm wearing, I imagine these evolving to a space where I can feel like I'm listening to a live concert in my headphones, where the acoustics of the room are perfectly matched. I can hear, a guitar player over there and a drummer over there. Maybe a conversation with my friend is happening behind me, but really allowing a complete acoustic space to be transferred in my headphones.
I want to mention 2 things. I think it's so cool to think about the concept about how, like, I don't know, like sound could affect your mood. Like if we could find like this specific sound that could specifically stimulate this one part of your brain to feel relaxed, like how cool would that be? But also thinking about like concert ticket prices, like they're so expensive, and it'd be so cool to have like your own personal concert, like at your home, or even thinking about like maybe like artists who are no longer with us today, like being able to still have that experience of like being in a concert or at a show. Very, very cool to think about like the future of sound and, well, just the technology of sound.
I agree.
So Jordan, I have 2 more questions for you as we kind of wrap up our interview together. The first one is kind of, my students want to know what you were like in high school. They know that I was a complete goofy goober, still am to this day, but they know me as like the goth teacher. So can you kind of tell them a little bit about how you and what you were like in high school?
Sure. I was really quiet and shy all throughout childhood and even through my early teenage years. Very reserved. Just enjoyed spending time on my own. I think that was just my comfort zone. I think towards my senior year, I started to kind of come out of my shell, recognize that I had a pretty cool personality and people would like me if I was able to express that more freely. I was always athletic, ran track, played lacrosse and volleyball all throughout high school. But yeah, in terms of personality, very quiet and reserved.
Oh my gosh, I think that's kind of funny to think about. Students are pretty quiet. I'm like, oh wait, like they have these personalities that are just waiting to come out. And
Right.
I'm like, I'm gonna have to be more goofy to encourage them to be goofy. And so Jordan, thinking about high school too, what kind of advice would you offer to a young high schooler, specifically a BIPOC high schooler who's seeking into going into maybe an engineer or a science career?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. My big advice was to get hands-on with your interests. I think at that age, there's a lot of external influences saying, you should become this, you should do this with your life. But start to ask your own questions. Really take the time and ask yourself, what am I interested in? And as you're figuring out those questions, like we have this internet with all the answers you could imagine out there. So it's really easy to do your own research, but don't be afraid to reach out. You're free to please give my email out to anyone who would like to continue this conversation with me. But really reach out to people who share your interests, see what they're up to, and see if those conversations either spark your interest further or, give you a sign that maybe that's not so much what you wanted to do. Asking those questions early on would be my biggest advice.
Yeah, and I think really exploring those different options and passions and interests, because even if I think like thinking about like for you, like you went into college like engineering and then you got involved in a lab and you're like, oh wait, the brain is pretty cool too. And
Right.
So being willing to kind of explore those options, because even for me, Jordan, I was like, yeah, like engineering. And I was like, wait, I like the brain too. And so I kind of just changed those routes based on your interests. And so thank you, Jordan. I really appreciate you bringing that for my students. Yeah, go with your passions and your interests.
Absolutely.
All right, so that is all that the time that we have today. Jordan, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to let us pick your brain about your background and also your research and answering those questions of my students. And also thank you, Miller, for your time too.
More than happy. And Jordan, I'll reach out to you about Columbia, Maryland. It's an interesting story.
I look forward to it. Thank you both so much for having me. This was wonderful.
All right, thank you, Lake Washington High School.